Welcome to the CR Dynamics podcast. I'm Chad Rauch, operations leader, founder, and someone who believes that how you run your business is just as important as what your business does. Today's guest spent 30 years proving that getting uncomfortable is not a risk. It's actually the strategy. Dave Ferrera is the CEO of RC Medical, a medical device venture studio based in Southern California. He has filed over 100 patents, raised more than $1 million across 3 companies. He launched simultaneously during COVID, and every one of those companies is on track for acquisition. Dave's not a passive investor. He's in the room, most cases the OR, helping physicians identify the problems we're solving, then building the companies to help solve them. Today, we're going to talk about the mindset that makes that possible, the operational model behind the venture studio, and why the best device does not always win. Dave, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Chad. I'm really happy to be here. We had a great agenda, and I'm looking forward to getting into it and talking about my career and what I plan to do in the future.
I appreciate that. Thank you. And we'll just jump right into it if you don't mind. So the framework you've talked about, that comfort zone, the learning zone, and the out of control zone, where did that come from? And how did you actually show up in your career?
I read a book probably 25 years ago called The Art of the Start, written by Guy Kawasaki, who was the evangelist for Apple. He worked with Steve Jobs. And in his book, he talked about how you can grow, and everyone enjoys being in the comfort zone, but that's not how you grow. So there's things you have to learn. So he had kind of a target. There was the comfort zone, the learning zone, and then the out of control zone. And what he professed was you learn the most when you're straddling the line between the out of control zone and the learning zone. And it just expands your comfort zone so much quicker. So I took that to heart 25 years ago, and that's kind of what I look for, is learning, but somewhat about things I have no idea about, but I have a strong curiosity and a great interest for.
Yeah. Framework impact your decisions after that? And once you found that out, what did that carry? Did that resonate? Did it become your strategic vision in a sense?
It did, and I sought out individuals to work for and learn from. I'm an engineer. I was an extrusion catheter engineer, but I wanted to learn about business. My father was a business person. He owned a tool and die shop. He made molds for injection molding. I was a process engineer, but I knew nothing about business, so I had to get uncomfortable and meet people and ask questions. And sometimes I didn't ask them the right way. I didn't sound as educated or smart, but once I got the answers, I was able to articulate them better. And now I'm not afraid to ask questions.
It's the process in you. You figuring out the hows and the whys, right?
Exactly.
It's always asking the question, digging a little deeper. Interesting. That's kind of, the little things that help shape your career, mentioning and finding out mentors, getting out of that comfort zone. And the more you grow, the more you learn, the more your knowledge increases. So that's a very good takeaway. I think I'm going to put that on my reading list, that book. So thank you for that recommendation. We'll make sure we ping that on the blast for this cast. But so you mentioned you were a process engineer and then you started your entrepreneurial journey in the late 90s. By your own admission, what did not go well? And those early failures, how did that teach you the success?
Yeah, the first company that I co-founded that I was an entrepreneur in was called Micros Endovascular. That was in 1997. And essentially was still an engineer. I didn't know much about business, financing, regulatory approval process, building a team. And I think my lack of knowledge on the finance part and the operational controls of the financials of the business kind of got in my way. And that business wasn't run well financially. It was difficult to raise the money. I wasn't the CEO, but I learned a lot from watching the CEO. And that lack of knowledge actually got me fired from a company that I co-founded.
Really?
It did, and that was in the Bay Area, and that termination is what landed me in Orange County. So I contacted a a founder of a competitor, and we were friends, and they needed an engineer to help them to develop their product. I met the team and I realized this is a team of executive all-stars that knew commercial, new product development, new financials, new regulatory. And if I was going to get my career to a higher level, I had to work for a team that I could learn from. So that's what landed me at Microvention in 1999. And that's why I've been in Orange County now for, over 25 years.
Interesting. So it's kind of fun. Like you find one door that closes, but it leads into others that is a better door to get into. Kind of stepping away from something that's not a great path for you.
Absolutely.
And sometimes those unfortunate moments are the best ones that happen in our lives.
It was a relief. I can tell you, when I got terminated, for probably a split second, I felt a little anxiety, but then this weight was lifted off of me, and I knew I could start something new. And I already thought about what the plan would be. I have to surround myself with more knowledgeable people than myself, and that's what I did. And here I am, still making mistakes, but moving forward.
Well, it kind of goes back to what we talked about on that Gary Kawasaki book, that uncomfortable zone. So getting into that space is that first step into uncomfortableness.
I had to move. I had to move my family, I don't know, 600 miles south. My wife got a different job. I had to drive a lot further. My kids had to change schools. But it was just a house. It was just a part of the country. It was all worth it. I mean, we're a lot happier here in Orange County.
That's, I think in the end, though, if you can find happiness, it becomes a joyful experience, right? I mean, if you're moving from something that you're not all in, but you're moving into something that makes you feel good, it takes to make work more fun. It takes the 4-letter cuss word out of work. It actually makes it enjoyable.
Yeah, there you go. That's true.
So moving forward a little bit in your time, you describe RC Medical as a venture studio, not as an accelerator, not as an incubator. Walk me through what that actually means operational wise, because you got 3 companies get built at the same time. That's a different mindset than starting up one. So walk me through what you mean by that.
Yeah, I think the venture studio probably started, decades ago. I believe it started in Southern California in like the technology business. Today, it probably has a few different forms or definitions, but what we do at RC Medical is we look for ideas. We form the company, but it has to be on a solid, a solid idea that's a real solution. We raise the money. That's the venture part. We build the team, and then we execute all the way to exit. So where I think accelerators and incubators may have some of that spirit, but they're not forming, raising, building, and exiting. And I think if you're not, actively doing all of those things, you're not going to bring a product to the marketplace. And I think that's the spirit of the venture studio. And we actually looked at that model before COVID, not knowing COVID was going to happen in 2020, but that was the moment where my partners and I left the company that we were at different times, but all within 6 to 9 months of each other. And then during 2020 and 2021, we were thinking about, several problems that we knew physicians had. We would call the physicians, and that's when we decided to form these 3 companies, because we knew we could form them. We knew we had the team. We knew we could raise the seed financing. And then we're all part of a CDMO, our contract design and manufacturing organization, that we could house the businesses that had the resources of the technicians, the engineers, the regulatory and quality team. So, having CDMO or a CDMO partner really allows the venture studio to function. So if you already have the shared resources, the fractional resources, then you can bring in the business, you can raise the money, and you can use the team to execute. Then you can get to an actual exit. So that's what we did between the middle of 2020 and the middle of 2021. And 4 years since then, or almost 5 years since then, we have one company that is commercial here in the US and also Europe. We have a second company that's commercial in Europe, soon to be commercial in North America. And we have a third company that's in a clinical trial that's in Europe. So, but it takes the ability to raise money, build a team, and execute. And if you're unable to raise funds, then there's no venture part in it. And that's what is, unfortunately, the death of many businesses, is they can't raise the money.
You get the initial seed, you get the initial investment, but at a certain point, you got to prove the value, right? And is that where, and execute, is that where partnering with the CDMO helped you guys kind of take that leap to execution?
Absolutely. The CDMO has its ISO 13485 certifications. It has the clean room. It has the resources and the assemblers and technicians and engineers. So then the company doesn't have to go out and find a building, hire people, which could take a year or longer. The CDMO has those key resources. What the CDMO doesn't have is it doesn't have the product idea, the financial ability, and say the commercial ability. So the CDMO is kind of in the middle, but but it has to be parked there so you can bring in the company, you can raise the money, use the team to execute and get to market. And I think that's something that is becoming more adopted now. Finding fractional teams, finding a CDMO, it's much more efficient. I believe a lot of strategics in the past wanted to be completely captive. Now there's so many CDMOs in the marketplace of medical devices because of private equity. They're rolling companies up, they're merging resources. There's some good groups and some aren't so good, but you have to find the group that is capable in your area of expertise. If it's orthopedics, I'm sure there's a CDMO out there. If you're in neurovascular, if you're in cardiovascular. So not all CDMOs can do everything, but find the one that has the capability that you need to develop your product. And that's what we did at RC Medical.
That's awesome. I mean, that kind of, it becomes the extension of your business. It's the operational arm to the sales and engineering aspect of it. So you're the
operations. Exactly. Yeah.
And that's a great strategy. I think reshoring, don't want to get onto that topic, but that reshoring aspect, the capital to build a strong manufacturing platform for one company is a heavy investment. But if you can capitalize on multiple, utilizing the same resources, just at different production runs, right, now you got economies of scale.
Yeah, and I think some investors don't have an interest in investing in a team that's doing multiple companies because they believe, they're just not focused or they're not all in. And I disagree. I mean, engineers aren't, going crazy 60 hours a week. I mean, there's uptime and downtime, and there's always ebbs and flows in the work when you're, something's being built, you're waiting to test, or you submitted something to the FDA, you're waiting for a response. So there's always an ebb and flow. So, engineers can work on more than one thing at once. Teams can do the same thing. So there's venture studios out there that have actually proven that that's, possible. And we're on the way to doing that as well.
I mean, it's awesome. But the question that comes into mind is, how do you stay out of the day-to-day without losing visibility of what matters? I mean, it's three things you got to be involved in, but you're really looking at the top of the mountain. How do you stay out of the day-to-day stuff?
Well, the team is multifunctional. So, I mean, I'm only CEO of one of the companies. I'm on the board of the other two. So we have other executives who are the leader, but then we have, VP of R&D, VP of regulatory that are also fractional. So, I mean, I may be the conductor per se, or I'm running the orchestra, but, there's a functional team in place. I'm not always raising money. I mean, you're raising money maybe once every 18 months. That's also a process. The regulatory approval, process. It also comes and goes when you file a submission to the FDA. If it's a 510K, it's a shorter process. If you're building for an IDE, for a trial, that's another process. But, it comes in stages, but you have experts on the team that's their responsibility. So the person running regulatory isn't, designing the product. The person designing the product isn't raising the money. The person who's manufacturing isn't doing sales. So you have to have functional people on the team. So it works in unison.
No, that's a very good point. I mean, they say obviously that you want to surround yourself. You mentioned yourself, surround yourself with good people. So if you develop the team that helps you spread the workload, and that's a great example. I mean, everything does come full circle.
Yeah.
You mentioned something in our early pre-calls that stuck with me. The best device rarely has the highest sales. Now, explain that to someone who's never been inside a hospital trying to sell something.
Yeah, sales is very dependent on the relationship of at least the medical devices. I'm not talking about Apple phones or widget. Okay, in medical devices, sales is highly driven by the relationship of the commercial team or the business with the customer, and assuming all products are designed to solve the problem, they're all safe, they've all passed the FDA requirements, they've all passed the CE mark requirements. You've gotten through the value analysis committee at the hospital. What really drives the sales is the relationship and the service that salesperson or the business can actually offer. Does your company have multiple products? Can you bundle and reduce the price? If there's a product problem, does the sales rep, respond to the physician within minutes or days? So the sales process is complicated, but to distill it down, it's strongly based on relationships. Assuming that all the products are relatively similar, they may be the same price. The most important part of that is the relationship between the salesperson and the company with the physician or customer. That's how sales happen. I mean, some of the sales reps, at least in the neurovascular field, are incredibly knowledgeable about the competition and how compatible other catheters may be with your device. A lot of the doctors, they know about that, but they don't fully understand the compatibility of all the new products, all the new catheters coming out by, say, Medtronic or Stryker that would work with your device. The salespeople know that. So they become an extension of like the team inside the interventional suite. So that is what really drives sales. It's not marketing, at least in medical devices. It's the relationship the person or company has with the customer. And the sooner people realize that, the smoother it is to get into the hospital, support the staff, get your purchase order, get the traction, commercial traction, which that's a sign of sales. But it is that complicated, but it's that simple.
Well, you mentioned relationships. We all know relationships are not simple. They are complicated, but they're at the heart of everything that we do, right?
Right.
So understanding that relationship with a physician, you're the expert on the device and how it can be compatible with other things. The physician's the expert in the situation, right? In that moment, that's their expertise. But you said the ideas come from physicians. Is that where having that relationship first allows that relationship to grow to provide ideas? And so when you're sitting in those procedure rooms, watching the frustration, is that when you decide when the problem is worth forming a company around?
Right. If you're fortunate enough to be able to be in a procedure room to observe or attend a conference, there's other conferences, called morbidity, mortality, or complication conferences where physicians will present a procedure that didn't go well. A patient got injured or a patient died, and they'll explain, I didn't have the right device, I didn't have the right product, or I had the right product, but it actually failed. I was using it beyond the limits. If you're, fortunate enough or unfortunate enough to observe these and really be curious and pay attention, it may only be a problem for that one physician or for a couple physicians. So the question becomes, when does it become a solution for everyone? You can get that observation, you can identify the problem, come up with a solution, and then you have to use your network and ask other physicians, other potential customers, have you seen this before? And if you don't have a strong relationship, some of the customers aren't going to be honest with you. I've never had that problem, or I've seen it once a year. It could that it happens every week. They just don't want to tell you. Or they have the same problem and they're coming up with their own solution. They're finding their own path. Okay. But having that relationship is key. Being curious is also important. And then having the understanding of what you're observing and what a solution could be is also important. And then you can take that and go back to the physician and say, hey, I observed this. I came up with an understanding of your problem. And is that correct? And I came up with a few solutions. Would this address the problem? But, it's not something you're just going to read in a magazine and go file a patent and go build a prototype, which I'm sure people do that. But that's not going to be as successful as communicating it with the person who had the problem and then seeing who else has the problem. Is it 3 people? Is it 100 people? Then you can say, yeah, there actually may be a market here.
Yeah, and that kind of that physician first approach, that kind of relationship that's built, no different than anything you see on a normal operation side. You don't redesign a process until you understand what the person is doing, or actually the actual experience beyond that. The problem definition has to come from the floor, OR room, but it's still what they're experiencing, and you get their feedback, and that's critical to make anything long-term to stick. So having that relationship approach is critical. And I think that it crosses a lot of different industry spectrums.
I agree.
Feeling somebody's pain and helping solve their pain generates the best ideas.
Yeah, there was a book I read, probably 20 years ago. It was called Spin Selling. And it was trying to identify the pain of the customer and solving the pain. I think I read the book, but I wasn't in sales. But you could apply that to other areas. I mean, in manufacturing, I can't make the product. I don't have the right tools. But the spin selling process was about identifying pain and reducing the pain of the customer.
That's another book I'll have to look at, spin.
You're
a walking library there. No, I mean, but that kind of goes back to what you said earlier on, is the knowledge. You find the knowledge, you find the things that you don't have the skills for, and either the people or the books to help supplement that
right.
moves you forward a little bit. I mean, continuous learning, right?
Right.
If we're not learning, we're not growing. The other aspect of that is kind of, what does a company get wrong most often during that early adoption stage? So we talked about the initial relationship and how to get in, but let's flip the script. What do they do wrong in that stage?
It usually comes down to the human factor. There could be some ego in play. Somebody just wants to get their idea through, or they want it to work so badly. And somebody has to make a decision and say, hey, we've gone too far. We have to course correct. Course correction, it doesn't happen soon enough in most cases. And then you run out of money. It's always a human factor, because these products can be modified, they can be improved, but if you're not getting the feedback properly or hearing the feedback properly, and like you get to market on a product, it gets used in humans, maybe 1,000 procedures, you're getting all this feedback, and your quality system documents the complaint, the product failures. The R&D team can use that to make improvements. Say the physician didn't like the size, didn't like the flexibility, didn't like the strength. Those are things we have to improve on, because it's actually documented within the quality system. If you're not reviewing the product complaints, then you're not going to have your second generation or third generation. And that's what happens a lot. Or you made enough money to get to market, but you didn't build relationships so the physicians aren't adopting you. You didn't create key opinion leaders, and then you run out of money. You can't raise the money, right? But it comes down to the feedback, the human decision to not take seriously the product feedback from your key opinion leaders. I mean, that's the biggest failure I've seen in the career I've had in working with companies is, well, the product's good enough, it's perfect. The physician just isn't trained properly. They've been doing 10,000 procedures. They've hit their level. They've done their 10,000 hours. Okay, they're experts, and this is what they're telling you they need. So course correct and give them what they need.
Have you, now going back to the ego, like you said, I think the relationship that you built with these physicians, if you don't have that relationship initially, you even mentioned yourself that they're not going to tell you the bad. So you can't get the feedback. They're just, you don't want to take the adage of no news is good news, especially when you're trying to adopt. So having that early relationship is key.
Well, and if you don't have the relationship, and the product doesn't work well, so in the interventional suite, there's a person that's in the lab that is responsible for documenting a product failure or product complaint, and that gets filed with the FDA in what's called a MAUDE report, MAUDE. So you can go on the FDA website and read the MAUDE reports. I could look up any company, any product, and find out what's the MAUDE report say, the number of complaints this quarter, this year, last year. And so even if you're a salesperson, there may be product complaints in another region of the United States, and you can read the MAUDE reports on the product that you're selling. And that's probably also documented in your company's quality report from the
Well, it should be.
complaint. So if you don't have the relationships, you can find the issues with your product. So there's other ways to get feedback and be like, hey, I think this has to be improved. We need a second generation. We're not growing the market.
Interesting. And then you mentioned, just for some of us not as in-depth in this, you mentioned your key partners or your key voices. Can you explain what that is a little bit, just for general knowledge?
The key opinion leaders are physicians that become advisors to our company. So they could be, the first users of the product. So when we launch a product, we actually do what's called an LMR, a limited market release. So before you commercialize to every hospital that you're approved in, you'll pick 10 of your trusted key opinion leaders, launch to them for 90 days or 6 months. You get the product used, get the feedback, and then you may be like, hey, whoa, we have to make a change now. It's not compatible with their favorite catheter. It's not detaching properly. Some sort of an issue that you can make a modification, then you can launch it to the rest of the market. But that limited market release is important, and every company should do it. Most actually do it. So that's where you get your initial feedback, and then once you do the full launch, you can build what's called the product registry. You can continue to collect data. Then the physicians can then publish in a major journal. They can present at a major conference, and that's also part of the sales process. It's like evangelizing the product. It's teaching the market, hey, we have a new product. It's been used at 30 centers. We've treated 1,000 patients. This is a major publication. This is a presentation at a major conference. And that helps the rest of your sales team to use the data to promote the safety and effectiveness. So having a small group of key opinion leaders, early adopters, helps you to evangelize the product and why it should be used by everyone.
Kind of the good news spreads faster. You want to use that approach, right? Let them promote what they're doing. It's an extension of your sales team, like you mentioned. If they're out at a conference and they mention your product, hey, that's free publicity, free exposure. So that kind of goes back into my previous lives and careers, that R&D development, that initial trial run. You build something at a smaller scale, test it out, get the feedback, before you just build 100 widgets, 1,000 widgets,
Yeah.
and go, oh, they all suck. Now you got to go back and
Right.
rebuild. And nobody wants to rework something. Do it once right.
Right. But, when you're developing something, you want to move fast. It's not ready for prime time. But there have to be controls in place and quality measures. And that's how all the big successful companies eventually do it. The smaller companies are the ones who really innovate in the new technology, the new procedure, the new indication. The bigger companies used to do that, 30, 40 years ago. Now they grow through acquisitions and mergers. But the smaller company has to have safety first. It's got to work. It has to be reliable. You can't have 5 out of 100 fail. It's going to be like, 0.5 out of 100 fail. But, sometimes people launch it, they do their LMR and realize, well, 5% failure rate, that's not safe. So you got to go back and improve your quality standards, retrain people.
I mentioned kind of back that started this whole kind of conversation, that people element. If you don't have that data up front, what if it is a training? What if they're using it wrong, or they're installing it wrong, or whatever the case may be?
Yeah.
Having initial data on a smaller scale, because nobody wants to have that FDA recall on a product, because that will hit the news.
Raising money.
That might be a bad flag to have.
That's not
in the
good.
background. That's not good. So kind of, as we were looking at this, if you're advising somebody that's building their first medical device company, what's the thing that most likely to underestimate between FDA clearance and their first real commercial success? What are they going to overlook? Does that ego get in the way?
Some companies don't have good key opinion leaders. They don't have good physicians that they can bring their prototypes through and get feedback. It's not a requirement by the FDA to have physicians, give you feedback. It has to be tested. You could hire a physician to go to a lab with you and test the product. And then you built your SOPs and your standards. You complete the testing, submit it to the FDA. But if you're working with a core group of customers and you have an engineering team that is really listening and taking the advice, then by the time you submit to the FDA, you already know it's designed for the customer, rather than just, hey, I made it stronger than the competition, but maybe the physician didn't want it as strong as you made it. It worked just fine the way it was. So, forming a good core group of physicians who are your key opinion leaders, they're the ones who are going to be using the product. They're the customers using it on patients. If you design it with them, that's feeding their ego. It's feeding your ego. That's going to help you get it to market and do your limited market release, have a successful product launch. I've seen companies that sometimes they have co-CEOs. You can't have two CEOs. But, a CEO and a CTO, or a CEO and a president could have different roles, but you got to define the roles. It comes down to the people. You can't have the CEOs, arguing over what the product spec should be. There has to be responsibilities. The lines have to be drawn. And if you have the wrong person, you have the wrong person. You hire slow and fire fast. Those are not cliches. They're true. I've actually terminated business partners before. And I've been fired before as a business partner. So I've experienced it, and I've also done it. But I think if you're forming a medical device company, you have to design the product with the customer in mind. So the customer or customers have to be part of that design cycle.
Well, I think that customer-centric focus it's very practical from a medical device standpoint, because you have safety involved with it. But that customer-centric approach should be taken across the board, not the sales approach of pushing something out there and hope people adapt it.
Right.
So out of all that, how does your venture studio model help companies navigate that stage differently than a solo startup?
Well, the customers that come to our venture studio, they usually have a problem and a solution, but they've never executed on any of the things we just discussed. How to file a patent, how to raise money, how to design a product, how to test a product. I mean, they have an idea, and we joke, ideas are free. And investors don't invest in ideas. Investors invest in people who execute. So if you have a team that executes, you're going to be able to raise money much easier than someone that's never done it before. And that's just the way it is. So the venture studio has a team that a customer, physician, and engineer can come to that has already executed in the past. We've had many successes, and we can be an extension of your executive team. So that's what a classic venture studio does, and that's what RC Medical is able to offer.
Excellent. So what you're describing there is the gap of kind of getting adopted to getting cleared, and that's where that venture studio, RC Medical, really steps in to bridge that for the solopreneurs that have the idea. Bringing the idea to the experts, the team of experts, not the one-man show, that whole team. And a company can have a great process improvement plan, but still fail at the adoption stage because nobody managed, like we talked about, the people.
That's right.
And that, so the best process doesn't either win. It's the relationship and the rollout that usually goes wrong. And that's where RC Medical steps in and helps pick up the pieces. So Dave, this has been generally a wonderful conversation. We covered a lot of different things, getting that insight and how you started out, what got your foundation, that your cycle, your business philosophy, but I want to reflect on three things that taken away from this. First is getting that uncomfortable is not a side effect of ambition. It's actually the method.
Right.
The comfort zone, the learning zone, and the outer control zone is not the operating. In at least two of those three, you're probably not growing. We talked about that. Knowledge is key for growth. Second, your venture studio model is not about doing more things. It's about doing the right things in parallel with the right infrastructure behind them. Physician approach, customer-centric, problem identification, utilizing that CDMO as an extension to you guys. And a partner is a clear, clean capital structure, and then the teams you build yourself. That's a repeatable system, not a personality trait. So, you proved it over time and time again. And the third last thing is the best device doesn't always win. It's the relationship. The best relationships, the best strategy, the best team, the best infrastructure. Right. Those that would determine adoption and execution after everything is done makes everybody's jobs that much more beneficial. So Dave, I asked this to everybody. One final question for you. Gonna put you on the spot. What's the one thing you want somebody listening to this to do differently starting tomorrow?
Solve a real problem. That's not just affecting one or two people, but affects hundreds or thousands. If you can solve a real problem, then you'll be able to form a team, get investors, and become successful.
I think that's a great takeaway. Solve a problem that other people need to have solved, right? So Dave, thank you for your time. Thank you for being straight about what actually works. For everybody listening, Dave's company is RC Medical Ventures. Links will be in the show notes. Dave, appreciate your time. Thank you for today.
My pleasure.